Anemia and polycythemia, second session. In the previous session, we discussed the microcytic anemias, and in this session, we are going to have a look on the macrocytic and the normocytic anemias. The macrocytic anemia, as you can see over here, is further categorized into megaloblastic and non-megaloblastic anemias. First of all, what are macrocytic anemias? As is evident by their name, macrocytic means increase in the size of the cell, as indicated by the MCV, a red blood cell indicator. If more than 100 picoliter, we will call it macrocytic anemia. And macrocytic anemia may be megaloblastic or non-megaloblastic. If the macrocytosis is because of the defect in the DNA, we will call it megaloblastic or macrocytic anemia. If the macrocytic cells are having no defect in the DNA, then we will call it a non-megaloblastic anemia. The most important cause of non-megaloblastic anemia are in front of you. One of the characteristic type caused by the alcoholism. We are going to have detailed look on only the megaloblastic anemias, among which we will be having a look at the folate and vitamin B12 deficiency anemias only. So let's begin our discussion about the macrocytic anemias. Starting from the vitamin B12 deficiency anemia, as we discussed in our previous session on iron and hemoglobin metabolism, the role of vitamin B12 and folic acid in the hemoglobin and RBC maturation. Let me review it quickly for you. Vitamin B12 and folic acid both are required for the synthesis of the DNA, particularly the thymidine 5-phosphate. If any of these two is deficient, the synthesis of DNA will be impaired, and so the nuclear maturation will be impacted. Such cells with immature nucleus will keep on growing their cytoplasm to the large size while the nucleus is still immature. The result would be ultimately the formation of large RBCs, megaloblasts, with fragile cell membranes, which release into the peripheral blood will be quickly hemolyzed. The result would be a speedy rate of erythropoiesis, but the cells which are formed are fragile, so they will be quickly deformed and destroyed in the peripheral blood smear. If we have a look at the RBC indices of these anemia patients, we will find megaloblast with a high MCV greater than 100 picoliter. Their MCH may be normal or raised, mean corpuscular hemoglobin. So they may be having normochromic cells or hyperchromic cells, whereas the iron deficiency anemia patients were having hypochromia and microcytosis. Of course, they will be having low hemoglobin and hematocrit. This is common to all types of anemias. One particular thing that is related to neutrophils is also seen inside these patients of megaloblastic anemia, hyper-segmented neutrophils. Again, their DNA maturation would be impacted in the neutrophils as well. Multiple lobes of the nuclei and hypersegmentation of the neutrophils would be seen. I will be showing you the microscopic slide in a while. Similar RBC indices will also be found in the folic acid deficiency anemia, including megaloblast, a normal or raised MCH, low hemoglobin and hematocrit as well. But hypersegmented neutrophils are more likely conspicuous feature of the megaloblastic anemia caused by the vitamin B12 deficiency. Now we will have a look at the causes of these types of anemias. As we discussed for the iron deficiency anemia, that can be caused by any level. For example, decreased intake in the diet, decreased absorption, increased demand. Similarly, anything can happen among these factors to cause the deficiency of vitamin B12 or folate. For example, vitamin B12 might be simply insufficient in the diet. For example, those specifically vegetarian will have deficient vitamin B12 in their diets. Number two, it can be caused because of the abnormal absorption or decreased absorption. Again, we discussed in detail how vitamin B12 is absorbed in our previous session. Quickly reviewing it, it binds to an intrinsic factor released by the parietal cells of the stomach in the stomach, and this complex travels to the ileum where it is absorbed by the endocytosis. So any defect over here or here will lead to the decreased absorption of vitamin B12, starting from the pernicious anemia, which is an autoimmune disorder of stomach, leading to the destruction of the parietal cells and hence the deficiency of the intrinsic factor, and the result would be ultimately deficiency of vitamin B12. Similarly, surgical gastrectomy if done, intrinsic factor would be unavailable and B12 absorption would be impaired. Ileectomy is surgical resection of the ileum. Again, the site of absorption of vitamin B12 is impaired. Intestinal sprue is the Crohn's disease, it's the celiac disease, which is going to hamper the absorptive surface area of the intestines, again leading to the malabsorption of nutrients, including vitamin B12 as well. Pancreatic insufficiency and diphyllobothrium latum, these two are also going to impair the absorption across the intestine. Diphyllobothrium latum is the fish tapeworm, and the pancreatic insufficiency may be caused by any reason, maybe inside the pancreas or maybe simply by the blockage of the pancreatic duct or the common bile duct. So any of these causes can lead to impaired vitamin B12 absorption and hence leading to the megaloblastic anemia. Similarly, if we look at the causes of the folic acid deficiency, they can be simply caused by the malnutrition, particularly seen in alcoholics. You may encounter many scenarios in your MCQs or exams, coming up exams, in which the patient is suffering from megaloblastic anemia and a cue of alcoholism is given. So think of the folic acid deficiency anemia. Malabsorption caused by any reason, any drug, for example, methotrexate, dimethoprim, phenytoin, they hamper the metabolism of folic acid, or maybe the increased requirement. For example, the pregnancy or hemolytic anemia, chronic blood loss, and with the chronic loss of the vitamin B12 and folic acid can also lead to deficiency of these nutrients. Now let's have a look at the special features of these anemias, starting from the vitamin B12 deficiency anemia. First two features you can see increased level of homocysteine and methylmalonic acid. That you can understand by looking at the detailed discussion on the hemoglobin synthesis in your biochemistry sessions. Because of the vitamin B12 deficiency, these two levels would be raised in the blood. While if we look at the folic acid deficiency anemia, only homocysteine will be raised, whereas methylmalonic acid levels would be normal. Another distinguishing feature between these two types of anemias is the presence of neurological symptoms in vitamin B12 deficiency anemia and no neurological symptoms in the folic acid deficiency anemia. These neurological symptoms are because of the degeneration of the neurons in the absence of vitamin B12 required for the appropriate myelination and action potential conduction. The symptoms may include the sensory motor pathways, the vestibular pathways, and the equilibrium as well as the memory. The patient may present with reversible dementia, may present with the symptoms because of the lesions of the spinocerebellar, which is a tract going to the cerebellum and may be involved in the equilibrium and many other functions as well. Lateral corticospinal tract for the motor symptoms and dorsal column dysfunction, which will be responsible for the sensory symptoms. And these are simply reversible by providing the adequate amount of vitamin B12 to the patient. Anemias due to insufficient intake of vitamin B12 and folic acid will take several years to develop, as liver has the ability to store vitamin B12. 3 to 4 years storage of vitamin B12 is available in the liver, but this is not true for the folate. It is not having that much adequate amount of storage in the liver, so it will be evident earlier as compared to the vitamin B12 deficiency. This is the peripheral microscopic image of the blood smear showing macrocytes, as you can see, increased size, whereas this is the normal smear. Number 2, you can see the hyperchromasia. The central pallor of the cells has diminished as compared to the normal RBCs. Number 3, you can appreciate over here hyper-segmented neutrophils. Look at the nuclei of these neutrophils. These 3 are the features of the vitamin B12 deficiency or megaloblastic anemia. Now we'll move on towards the discussion of normocytic anemia. Normocytic anemia, let me quickly get back to the classification slide. As we discussed in the first session, when the cells are having a normal mean corpuscular volume between 80 to 100, and these can be of 2 types, either hemolytic anemia or non-hemolytic anemia. Non-hemolytic anemias will be having anemia, but normal cell size and a reticulocyte count of less than 1 to 2%. Whereas hemolytic anemia will be having a higher reticulocyte count. Some books say it's 1% and some books say this is 2%, which is the cutoff value. Non-hemolytic normocytic anemia's most important prototype for you is the aplastic anemia, in which the bone marrow will be non-functional, and other you can see, for example, in chronic kidney disease, erythropoietin will not be available, so there will be decreased erythropoiesis. Anemia of chronic disease, inflammatory markers will decrease the erythropoiesis, and hemolytic anemias will be those anemias in which there will be normocytosis with increased reticulocyte count, and this can further be because of 2 reasons: intrinsic reasons or extrinsic reasons. The extrinsic reasons may be because of some infection or rest are out of your scope, but you can see maybe because of the autoimmune causes, or maybe the intrinsic reasons of the RBCs. For example, its membrane is defective, from which we will be having a look at the hereditary spherocytosis. For example, because of an RBC enzyme deficiency like glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, or something abnormal with the hemoglobin like the sickle cell anemia. So we will be discussing in the rest of this session aplastic anemia, hereditary spherocytosis, glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, and the sickle cell anemia, all of which are the hemolytic anemias, and aplastic anemia is non-hemolytic, but all these are the normocytic anemia. So let's begin the discussion one by one about these normocytic anemia, starting from the non-hemolytic and aplastic anemia. Aplastic anemia, as I said before, is because of the abnormal bone marrow. Anything which decreases or diminishes the functioning of the bone marrow will decrease the rate of hematopoiesis and hence the erythropoiesis as well. The cells which would be produced would be less in number but normal in size and normal stain. They will be having a normal mean corpuscular volume, normal MCH value, overall RBC count, hemoglobin and hematocrit would be decreased. Now that the bone marrow is functioning less than normal, of course, the reticulocyte count will decrease, and to counteract this effect, body will try to compensate for it by increasing the erythropoietin secretion. As the bone marrow is non-functional, not only the RBCs but other cell lineages will also decrease, including the WBCs causing leukopenia and platelets causing thrombocytopenia. The cells will have normal cell morphology, but if we do a bone marrow biopsy, we will see a dry tap. The bone marrow will be hypocellular, rather the fatty infiltration instead of the normal hematopoietic stem cells, and we will call it a dry bone marrow tap. Now, the causes of bone marrow failure can be variable, starting from the most important 2 reasons in front of you: radiation exposure or chemotherapeutic exposure. This can be because of a carcinoma which was being treated, or because of the person who was working over there, for example, a nuclear power plant worker. Exposure to certain toxic chemicals which can decrease the functioning of hematopoietic stem cells. Again, you might encounter a scenario or a patient in which an industry worker in gasoline factory presented with this aplastic anemia. These viral agents can lead to non-functional bone marrow. Fanconi anemia is a genetic cause of bone marrow failure. Autoimmune causes हो सकती हैं and idiopathic causes. The symptoms, some are generic, like fatigue, malaise, and pallor are generic symptoms of anemia, which will be present in any type of anemia. But the aplastic anemia patients will also present with the deficiency of WBCs and platelets deficiency symptoms. For example, deficiency of WBCs will lead to recurrent infections, and deficiency of platelets will lead to bleeding symptoms. For example, you can see over here purpura, mucosal bleeding, and fatigue. To treat this aplastic anemia, some are supportive treatments and some are there to treat the root cause. For example, repeated transfusions will sustain the aplastic anemia symptoms for a while, but ultimately the patient will need the bone marrow transplant. At the same time, we have to treat the root cause of that. For example, if it was an autoimmune disorder, we will have to give the immunosuppressive agents. If it was because of exposure to certain chemicals or radiation, the bone marrow stimulating factors may also provide the symptomatic relief for a while, but the ultimate treatment for all is bone marrow transplant. Second cause of non-hemolytic normocytic anemia in front of you is acute blood loss anemia. Now, what happens in acute blood loss? For example, there was severe roadside accident and a lot of hemorrhage afterwards, or during childbirth, excessive blood loss, that will present as acute blood loss anemia, in which the hemoglobin and hematocrit will decrease, but the remaining cells will have normal MCV and MCH. Afterwards, if the loss was under the homeostatic capacity of the body, the plasma level will be restored in 1 to 3 days, whereas the RBCs will be replaced in 3 to 6 weeks, as it will take some time for the body to produce erythropoietin. That erythropoietin will go to the bone marrow, will stimulate the hematopoietic stem cells, and then the whole procedure till the formation of reticulocyte and then the RBCs. So the first time the new RBCs will start appearing in approximately 5 days, but it will at least take a few weeks to recover all those RBCs which were lost in the acute hemorrhage. And if this acute blood loss continues for a prolonged period of time, for example, in case of heavy menstruation or blood loss from the GIT in case of a carcinoma, let's for example, that can convert into either iron deficiency anemia or chronic blood loss anemia as well. This is the peripheral smear of aplastic anemia, in which you can see the normal size, the normal mean corpuscular volume, and normal stain, that is normal MCH. There is the normal central pallor, not increased, not decreased, but the number of cells you can appreciate over here has decreased. So this patient will present with pancytopenia, normocytic, normochromic anemia, and the condition is aplastic anemia. Now, the normocytic anemias of hemolytic type, starting from the general presentation of the hemolytic anemias, these anemias are because of some reason which is causing excessive hemolysis of the RBCs. These RBCs were being produced from the bone marrow in a right amount, but there was some internal or external reason which was quickly destroying these RBCs, because of which the hemoglobin deficiency was manifested. Now, the RBCs which are being produced on the first hand by the bone marrow are having normal size and normal stain. So, the MCV and MCH is normal. Now, there is deficiency of hemoglobin in the body. This will be manifested by increased erythropoietin secretion and increased erythropoiesis by the bone marrow to compensate. So ultimately what we will have is increased reticulocyte count, at least more than 1% or 2%. Now there is excessive hemolysis of RBCs. All hemolytic anemias will present with increased bilirubin level, particularly the unconjugated bilirubin level, as it will exceed the capacity of the liver to conjugate all that bilirubin which is being produced by the hemolysis of RBCs. Plus, now there is more bilirubin available, there will be more urobilinogen in the urine as well. And if it goes to that extent, it may even present as prehepatic jaundice that we discussed while discussing the hemoglobin metabolism. Now, the causes of hemolysis, first we said can be because of intrinsic or extrinsic causes, in which we said the causes inside the RBC, for example, hemoglobin or membrane defect, or extrinsic causes, for example, autoimmune cause or something other. Here you can see this is divided into two other causes, including intravascular or extravascular. Intravascular means inside the blood vessel and extravascular means outside the blood vessel. So inside the blood vessel, if the hemolysis is happening rapidly, that can be, for example, because of a mechanical trauma, like a prosthetic heart valve was replaced surgically, and that heart valve is now damaging the RBCs while they were going through the heart and causing excessive hemolysis of those RBCs. If that hemolysis is occurring inside the blood vessels, the hemoglobin will be poured into the plasma, and this will appear in urine. Hemoglobin urea, hemosiderin urea, and urobilinogen in the urine will increase. Whereas in case of extravascular hemolysis, this is going to occur in, for example, spleen and liver because of fragility of these, excessive fragility of those RBCs. Now there will be no hemoglobin or hemosiderin in the urine, whereas the urobilinogen will be increased. Urobilinogen is increased in both the causes because this is what is occurring after the conjugation in the liver, excessive production of bilirubin, then its conjugation, and then it is being released into the intestine and then taken up into the blood and to kidney, and urobilinogen and stercobilinogen will increase because of the excessive availability of the bilirubin. So this is same for both intravascular and extravascular, but hemoglobin urea and hemosiderin urea will be only seen in the intravascular hemolysis. So first of all, we'll have a look at the sickle cell anemia, the most important prototypic hemolytic anemia for you, also for your exam point of view. Sickle cell disease, you must be aware before, is because of the defect in the hemoglobin. In the microcytic anemias, we discussed the thalassemias, which was due to the deficiency of the hemoglobin, whereas sickle cell anemia is because of the defective hemoglobin in which there is a point mutation causing replacement of glutamic acid by valine in the beta chain. The hemoglobin ultimately formed instead of hemoglobin A1, which is normal, we call it hemoglobin S. And this hemoglobin has a problem. On exposure to hypoxia, this hemoglobin crystallizes. And if this hemoglobin crystallizes, the RBC becomes sickle shaped, as you can see in this image. Because of crystallization of hemoglobin, this has converted into a sickle or crescent shape, and this is now more fragile and will be excessively hemolyzed when passing through the spleen and liver and other macrophages. So RBC indices, if we look at the MCV, MCH would be normal. It is a normocytic hemolytic anemia. The bilirubin level will be raised in these patients. Reticulocyte count level will be raised in these patients. Urobilinogen will be raised, and these are pertinent to all types of hemolytic anemia. Particularly for sickle cell anemia, you will find on peripheral smear crescent-shaped cells plus true-cut skull X-ray. This is what we also saw in the thalassemia, and we call it because there is excessive hematopoiesis. So here, this is what is happening again. All the bone marrows will be trying to compensate for the hemoglobin deficiency by producing more and more RBCs. So again, here we will see here on end appearance of the skull X-ray or the crew-cut appearance. If we look at the special features of sickle cell anemia, there are many to discuss, starting from the aplastic crisis. It is different from the aplastic anemia. Aplastic anemia is because of the bone marrow failure, and that's presenting with the pancytopenia. But here, this aplastic crisis is because of a viral reason, parvovirus, that is common to aplastic anemia. Aplastic anemia causes we discussed, we said that there can be because of the viral attack. So these hemolytic sickle cell anemia patients are more prone to infection with the parvovirus, because of which, in addition to the sickle cell anemia, they can go into aplastic crisis in which their bone marrow stop functioning and present with pancytopenia even. So in addition to this hemoglobin S, they might present with the aplastic crisis caused because of the increased propensity to infection by these parvovirus. These sickle cell shaped RBCs are less flexible and pliable, so they will have a difficulty to pass through the capillaries. We discussed in our first session on the RBCs that the average diameter of the RBCs is 7 to 8, I'm forgetting micrometer or nanometer. Anyways, if I forget the units, the smallest capillaries are having 2 to 3 micrometer diameter. These RBCs, normal ones, are so flexible that they can simply squeeze through these capillaries, but the sickle-shaped RBCs are not that much flexible, so they may find difficulty in passing through such capillaries and occlude these blood vessels, leading to ultimately infarcts and ischemias. And this can happen in any of the organ systems, for example, leading to the splenic infarcts or sequestration crisis. Sequestration crisis is when many of the RBCs get trapped over here in the splenic vasculature and get hemolyzed at once. They can cause occlusion of the vasculature of the bones as well, leading to ischemia and providing a rich culture for the fostering of this bacterium, Salmonella, which will ultimately result in Salmonella osteomyelitis. Because of the occlusion of this peripheral vasculature, they can also lead to painful vaso-occlusive crisis. Now you can see by the name, vaso-occlusive means occlusion of the vessels, and because of which there would be a severe pain symptoms. For example, in the peripheries of the fingers, causing dactylitis, priapism, acute chest syndrome because of the occlusion of the pulmonary vasculature. Avascular necrosis means vessel blockade causing death of the tissue, and stroke if causing occlusion of a major blood vessel in the heart or brain. Similarly, these sickle cells can get trapped inside the renal vasculature. When you will go through your renal module, you will see the kidney is divided into outer cortex and inner medulla. The blood supply to inner medulla is much less as compared to the cortex. So medulla is more vulnerable to the deficiency of blood. So whenever the blood flow will decrease, the renal medulla will be more prone to ischemia as compared to cortex. So this is what the sickle cells can do, leading to the papillary necrosis. Here, this point where all the calyces meet, this is the renal papilla at the verge of this renal medulla, and this will be necrosed or destroyed, and ultimately leading to blood in the urine that is called as hematuria. So these splenic cells, upon exposure to, not splenic cells, the sickle cell shaped cells, upon exposure to hypoxia, will sickle and will lead to occlusion of any of the blood vessels, may it be heart, brain, spleen, peripheries of the fingers, pulmonary vasculature, bones, kidney, and can lead to any of these above given complications. The diagnosis of sickle cell anemia is based upon hemoglobin electrophoresis. As we discussed in our lecture on hemoglobin, we measure the distance of the movement of hemoglobin from between cathode and anode, and the distance traveled help us in diagnosing which type of hemoglobin it was. Was it hemoglobin A, S, F, or any other type of hemoglobin? The treatment you can see over here is by providing hydroxyurea and hydration. Hydration simply is a supportive treatment to prevent the sickling, and if there is dehydration, the sickling crisis will be exacerbated. And hydroxyurea is a chemical which is going to stimulate the production of hemoglobin F. I hope you can appreciate how is it going to help in the treatment of sickle cell disease. As you know, sickle cell disease is having a normal beta globin chain. If we stimulate the production of hemoglobin F, it has alpha chain and gamma chains. So this beta chain will be replaced by the gamma chain in the hemoglobin F, and the severity of sickle cell symptoms would reduce somewhat in these patients. And because of the same effect, the sickle cell anemia, it starts presenting its symptoms only after a few months when the hemoglobin A replaces hemoglobin F. Until then, the newborns are asymptomatic for the sickle cell anemia. The sickle cell anemia is an inherited disorder that may present as heterozygous or homozygous. The homozygous inherited patients will be having full-blown sickle cell anemia, whereas heterozygous patients will be silent carriers and just a minor anemia they will present with, and that is sustainable with life. Also, the homozygous trait is sustainable with life, but the survival is much shortened because of all those complications we just discussed. The heterozygotes are, however, having a benefit that they are having more resistance to malaria. Malaria is a viral disorder that again is more in tropical regions. I'll show you that in the next slide, the importance of it. And hemoglobin mutations causing hemoglobin C are inherited from parents. And there is an other important fact that a patient might be inheriting two different mutations from mother and father. For example, one mutation of hemoglobin S from mother and hemoglobin C from the father. So such patient may present with hemoglobin S and C. So sickle cell anemia is more prevalent among the descendants of tropical regions. Why do you think is that so? This is what relates to our previous discussion on the previous slide, that these sickle cell carrier patients are more resistant to malaria. So while they were more resistant to malaria, they survived more, but after the survival, they will have, of course, sickle cell anemia, which will be inherited to their offsprings and will be presented more. So that is why the tropical region people are more having sickle cell anemia as compared to the non-tropical regions. That is just a fun fact. One thing we discussed was sickling crisis. Now, how does that actually occur and how it can lead to fatality if not taken care of? Let's have a look in this flow chart. Whenever there is hypoxia or low oxygen concentration, hemoglobin S is going to crystallize. Crystallization is going to elongate the RBCs into sickle shape, which is going to damage its cell membrane, increasing its fragility, leading to hemolysis and severe anemia. Now, whenever this hypoxia occurs, there is hemolysis of RBCs, which will further decrease the level of tissue oxygen. And this will further cause crystallization, sickling, further hemolysis, and this will continue going on in this vicious circle until stopped by some intervention. So if this is not taken care of, it can rapidly lead to progression and death within a few hours. Another type of hemolytic anemia, that is hereditary spherocytosis, is because of defect in the membrane. Previously, we saw sickle cell anemia because of the defect in the hemoglobin. So hereditary spherocytosis, as is evident by the name, is a hereditary condition in which the cell membrane of the spherocytes is defective. Normally, the RBCs are oval shaped and biconcave, but in hereditary spherocytosis, they lack this concavity. Rather, they become small and spherical. And this is because of the defect in the membrane proteins. Now, what is the ultimate impact of this? They have low MCV, their size has reduced. Also, because of this membrane defect, this surface area reduces. Surface area be reduced and volume also reduced. Now, there is a third term called surface area to volume ratio, as we discussed in our session on RBC indices. Surface area to volume ratio. Now, these spherocytes have very low surface area and low volume, ultimately leading to a change in this ratio as well. As surface area is reduced more, the overall ratio is decreased. So, they will be having low surface area to volume ratio as well, because of which their osmotic fragility is going to increase. Increased fragility means easy hemolysis. So low volume, low surface area to volume ratio, and increased osmotic fragility. One thing which is special to hereditary spherocytosis that we did not encounter in previous types of anemias is increased in the MCHC level. There is going to be no central pallor. We saw hyperchromasia and increased MCH in the megaloblastic anemias, either normal or raised, but we did not encounter increased MCHC in any of the anemias previously discussed. So this is a particular feature that you can memorize over here related to the hereditary spherocytosis. Cause is defect in the proteins interacting with the RBC membrane, skeleton, and plasma membrane. For example, the proteins included are ankyrin band 3, protein 4.2, and spectrin. This is having an autosomal dominant inheritance. The complications you will encounter in such patients will be, first of all, you can see splenomegaly. Splenomegaly would be because there will be more cells to destroy, so spleen will have to work more and its size will increase. As that of the sickle cell anemia patients, these patients are also more prone to infection by the parvovirus and thus are at a risk of aplastic crisis. One of the treatments advised for the hereditary spherocytosis is splenectomy. When there will be no spleen working, the hemolysis of these abnormal shaped RBCs will reduce to some extent that can be manageable. This is comparing the normal smear on the right side to the smear of the hereditary spherocytosis on the left side. As you can see, the size and shape of the cells have become more spherical. The size of the cells has reduced, and also you can appreciate the central pallor has disappeared. Spherical RBCs, hyperchromasia, and microcytosis, the features of hereditary spherocytosis. Hemolytic anemia erythroblastosis fetalis. We will be having a detailed discussion about this when we are discussing the bioincompatibility. Right now, just remember when the blood group of mother and fetus are incompatible, like mother is having a negative blood group and fetus is having a positive blood group, that can lead to destruction of the fetal RBCs from the maternal immune cells, causing excessive hemolysis, and the condition is known as erythroblastosis fetalis. Another hemolytic anemia because of glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. This is an enzyme which was required to sustain the level of NADPH in the RBCs. If this enzyme is not available, NADPH, it will reduce, and thus the amount of glutathione will reduce, and this will increase the susceptibility of RBCs towards the oxidative stress. In front, you can see the examples of those which can lead to oxidative stress. For example, some drugs, antimalarial infections, fava beans. So these patients may require lifestyle modifications to avoid exposure to these dietary and chemical drugs, which can increase the oxidative stress and thus lead to excessive hemolysis of their RBCs. The features are what we see in most hemolytic anemias, including normocytosis, that is normal MCV, normal MCH, increased bilirubin, increased reticulocyte count, increased unconjugated bilirubin, increased urobilinogen, and even hemoglobinuria will be seen because of their excessive hemolysis in the blood vessels. If we want to treat hemolytic anemias, first of all, of course, we need to treat the root cause. For example, in case of hereditary spherocytosis, we can go with splenectomy, but that has its own complications. When spleen would not be there, you are removing a reticuloendothelial organ, that will increase the risk of sepsis. Milder cases are treated with the supportive treatment, for example, blood transfusions and dietary supplementation of iron, folate, vitamin B12. Autoimmune hemolytic anemias are treated by the immunosuppressive treatments, for example, corticosteroids. Now that we are done with the discussion on the macrocytic and normocytic anemias, let's have a quick overview of how this anemia impacts the circulatory system of the body. Of course, anemia is going to impact many systems of the body, but this is what is most evident even in the earlier phases of anemia. So starting from the effect on blood viscosity, you will get to know most of these terms well when you go through your cardiovascular module. I will be quickly reviewing these concepts over here to make you understand what is happening to the circulatory system in anemia. Blood viscosity is the resistance to the flow of blood. Now, this blood viscosity is mostly caused by the RBCs plus plasma proteins. More contribution by the RBCs. Now, whenever the RBC count will decrease, the blood viscosity will decrease and resistance to flow of blood will decrease. Now, there would be less resistance to flow of blood. It will be easier for the blood to travel from peripheral veins to the heart. There is going to be increased venous return to the heart. When there is going to be increased venous return to the heart, there is going to be an increased cardiac output, ultimately leading to an increased workload on the heart. Simply by reducing the blood viscosity, workload on the heart was increased. Number two, RBCs were responsible for carrying oxygen to the peripheral tissue. When RBCs will reduce, the oxygen carrying capacity of blood will overall reduce. And the body will try to compensate for that decreased availability of oxygen by doing vasodilation so that more blood can flow to the peripheral vasculature and other organs, providing the required amount of oxygen. That peripheral vasodilation will further ease the flow of blood. More the diameter of the blood vessel, easier the blood to flow. Again, it will lead to increased venous return. So both the decreased viscosity and decreased oxygen capacity by vasodilation led to an increased venous return, ultimately leading to increased workload on the heart. Now the workload on the heart is increased and cardiac output is increased. This is going to lead to another problem. One, that heart is going to work more all day long for no reason, and this is going to be a problem for the heart. This can ultimately lead to even high cardiac output failure. Cardiac failure and caused because of the high cardiac output. Number two, this heart has another problem. Normally, our heart's at resting state works at this. 5 liters per minute is the cardiac output. And when we exercise, the heart has the capacity to increase its workload and cardiac output to as much required. For example, if you are running fast and you require 25 liters per minute, your heart will increase its cardiac output to as much as you need. And this capacity is known as cardiac reserve. Now, in case of anemia, when your heart is already working at 25 liters per minute and you start exercising and you want to increase the cardiac output further, let's suppose you want it to be 35 liters per minute to provide you enough oxygen in anemic blood, your heart has no more reserve available to increase its cardiac output anymore, and that will lead to acute cardiac failure. So these anemic patients may sustain at resting state, but will fail maybe at the onset of some exercise. So other generic symptoms caused like fatigue, breathlessness, and inability to do strenuous exercises. These can also be related to the low oxygen delivery and already increased cardiac output, as we just discussed in this image. So these are the complications of anemia on the circulatory system. And this concludes our discussion on the anemia. Now we are going to have a look at the polycythemia, which is quite the opposite of the anemia. Poly means cell and cythemia means increase in its number. And polycythemia is particularly pertinent to increase in the number of the RBCs. Whenever they increase more than what is required or normal range, we will call it polycythemia. And polycythemia can be secondary to some problem, or it may be primarily caused because of the hematopoietic stem cells. Now let's have a look at these two one by one. Secondary to some reason means there was some cause in the body which led to the increased production of the RBCs. For example, someone was exposed to hypoxia for a prolonged period. For example, shifted to a high altitude, a soldier who was native of land and was posted in Sachin for 1 year, and he is exposed to high altitude for that 1 year, his body will try to compensate for that hypoxia exposed by inhaling low oxygen partial pressure at this much altitude, and that erythropoietin will lead to excessive production of the RBCs to compensate for the lack of oxygen in the peripheral tissue. Other reasons, for example, cardiac failure, renal failure, any artery blockade, for whatever reason, the body is exposed to hypoxia for the prolonged time. The body will try to compensate for this hypoxia by increased production of erythropoietin and hence increased production of the RBCs. Such patients may have more than normal range is 5 to 5.5 millions per cubic millimeter. They may present with even 6 to 7 millions per cubic millimeter. They may compensate for this hypoxia by increased RBC production, but they will undergo other complications that we will discuss in the coming up slide. If we have a look at the erythropoietin level of this patient, of course, that would be raised because this is what led to increased erythropoiesis ultimate. In comparison, what primary polycythemia is, also we call it polycythemia vera. This is a genetic aberration of the hemocytoblastic cells. The body did not need more RBCs, but the hematopoietic stem cells were made to do so because of a genetic aberration in which the control on the rate of hematopoiesis is lost. There is uncontrolled, unwanted excess production of the RBCs, and that is going to lead to, again, increased RBC load, which will increase the blood volume and blood viscosity as well. These patients will present with an RBC count maybe 7 to 8 millions per cubic millimeter, much more than that of even the secondary polycythemia. The hematocrit from normal 45% will be raised to 60 to 70%. And if we look at the erythropoietin level in this patient, it will of course be low, and that is again a negative feedback rule. Already there are more RBCs being produced for no reason. To compensate for that, kidneys will decrease the production of erythropoietin. Other names for secondary and primary polycythemia in front of you. Secondary polycythemia is a normal physiological phenomena that exceeds the normal limit of the body. So we call it the physiological polycythemia. And primary polycythemia is also known as polycythemia vera. So the complications of polycythemia, what will happen? Let's have a look. What happens to the venous return and what happens to the arterial blood pressure? If you are comparing with the anemia, you might be thinking that the venous return might be decreasing because of the increased viscosity of the blood. As viscosity is dependent upon the number of RBCs, if they increase, probably the viscosity should increase and venous return should decrease. But here you can see the venous return is constant. Now, why is it constant? Because it is impacted by another factor as well. This is increased by high blood volume and decreased by high viscosity. Now, overall, the blood volume in the body will increase. Normally, we have 5 liters of the plasma in the body, 5 liters of blood, and females have 5 and males have 5.5 liters. This is the normal range of blood volume inside the adult humans. In case of polycythemia, this may increase, for example, to 6 liters, to 6.5 liters, to 7 liters, just for an example. And this will now increase the venous return. The total increase in the blood volume will increase the venous return, increased viscosity will decrease the venous return, and they will counteract each other's effect, and ultimately the venous return will remain constant. So there is no much impact on the venous return in case of polycythemia, whereas it was increased in case of anemia. Number 2, what happens to the arterial blood pressure? Arterial blood pressure is, if we quickly review, is dependent majorly upon two things: cardiac output and total peripheral resistance. Now, because of increased viscosity, total peripheral resistance has increased. So, the polycythemia patients may present to you with the hypertension as their arterial blood pressure will be increased. Number 3, you can see the impact on the skin color. Now that we see RBCs, if oxygenated, they give a red tinge, and if deoxygenated, they give a blue tinge. Anemic patients have low RBCs, so they have a pale tinge to their mucosa layers in conjunctiva. And here you might suspect there is polycythemia, more RBCs, more oxygenation, and they might be more red. So that's true. They have a ruddy complexion, but there is another twist to the story. That blood was well oxygenated, having more RBCs and more oxygen when it came from the lungs, but at the peripheral vasculature, especially in the small cutaneous capillaries, the blood flow is sluggish because of increased viscosity, and it is taking more time to get back for oxygenation. It stays for a longer time in the peripheral vasculature, where it also gets deoxygenated. So there are more RBCs giving a reddish tinge, but many of them are now deoxygenated, giving a bluish tinge. So we say they have a ruddy complexion because of high blood volume and cyanotic tinge because of sluggish flow. Ultimately, the patients present with a ruddy complexion with a cyanotic tinge. Let me show you this image. The ruddy complexion with a cyanotic tinge, as you can appreciate in the nails as well as peripheries of the fingers as compared to the norm. Again, you can appreciate this ruddy complexion with the cyanotic tinge seen in polycythemia, and here is the upper image is also showing the comparison with the normal skin color. So that's all about the overview of polycythemia as well. Thank you.